Inspiration, brave action, and heartwarming journeys. This is what the Louise H. Reed Show brings you. Now, here's your host, Louise H. Reed.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. Each week, I invite you to sit in on a conversation with a new guest where we get level, bringing you real people, real issues, and real conversations. My hope is that you walk away from the show inspired and equipped to level up in your own life and leadership. If you would like a copy of the best of notes and quotes, please subscribe to my email list at louisehreed.com. Finally, you all know I love to give away exclusive Lady Boss Loyalty swag as a way of saying thanks to you for spending your time with me. To get your hands on some, simply comment on a podcast episode with the hashtag LadyBossLoyalty and you will automatically be entered into the draw. Without further ado, let me introduce you to today's amazing guest. I didn't mean to sing that just then. I'm just how excited I am about the show. So today we have with us Matt Zinman. He is a difference maker devoted to personally enrich the lives of 100 million people by 2025. His new book, Z-isms, Insights to Live By, is based on his experiences as an entrepreneur, athlete, single parent, caregiver, and nonprofit founder. Matt is also the soon-to-be host of Insights to Live By, a podcast that invites guests to share their own pearls of wisdom. He is also CEO of the Internship Institute, which he established in 2007 to make experience matter. Matt, my new friend, welcome to the show.
Hey, Louise. Thank you so much for having me on.
I sang your name again. Like, what's with the singing?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Get the high energy going right away. I like it.
Right on. So right out of the gates, right in the first sentence of your bio, I think that right there indicates to me, or makes it really clear why I was really drawn to you. And there's lots of other reasons as well. Devoted to personally enrich the lives of 100 million people by 2025. Talk about brave and bold. That's, a pretty big mission. I'd love to hear, where did this is a big question, a big answer, I realize, but where did that mission come from?
Right. Well, I have always gotten my drive from making a difference. It's something I've known from a very young age, and my employers, going through my career, didn't always appreciate that, but it's something that I continue to push forward to do. And as the book came out, and I kind of framed it around wanting to positively impact as many people as possible. I don't have a coaching business, for example. It's not something I'm trying to hold up as a way of drawing clients and so forth. I really want to get it out there and have it be an impact. But I also, as things evolve, want to be very specific and have it be more of an objective. How many by when? And in just looking at it, and I said, well, if I can do 10, I can aim for 100. So it's a recent goal. It's one of the reasons why the podcast is coming online next month, and then we'll see where that leads.
I love it. And I realized as I was looking at my notes for the show, I mispronounced, being Canadian.
Right.
ZZ. I mispronounced the name. It's Z-isms.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's okay, because every time I say Z-isms, it's like, well, for international, I want to be respectful. It's dead everywhere else, but we do say Z with some allegiance to America.
That's okay. That's where you're from. So, you're being inclusive and didn't belittle me for using my own dialect.
No.
And that's why I did appreciate you mentioning that in the book, right in the intro. There was a phonetic,
right.
You explained how to pronounce the word. What I'd love to spend some time doing, because I enjoyed your book so much, and those who are watching on the YouTube, watching live on Facebook, or catching this later on YouTube, will see that I'm holding the book in front of me with all sorts of beautiful sticky notes.
Wow.
Because I like.
You did your homework there.
I did my homework. I love to read, and I love to decorate my books.
Nice.
To me, it's a sign of respect to the author and the energy and time that went into the book. That's just me. What I'd love to do is to dig into the book a little bit, if we may, And then, some of the things that really stood out to me, I'd love to ask you about. I'd love to explore even where some of these things came from. I know in your bio, you mentioned it really, it's a significant mashup of all of the things that you have been professionally and personally in your life. And so much, as you called it, pearls of wisdom, when we can knit together these experiences. So I'd love to maybe, talk about the book and then just dive into like aspects of who you are and where this.
Yeah. Go ask Matt anything.
Ask Matt anything.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go there. That also could be a different show, but we'll keep it. Yeah.
Right.
With that sentiment in mind, tell us about what is a Z-ism, like right out of the gates. Why Z-isms?
Well, for one, just it's something that everyone has accumulated through their life experience, those guiding principles, the advice that we often give other people, just things that really hold true for anyone individually. And certainly we accumulate those, and they provide a framework for the book. And when people think of isms, they often think, well, quips or quotes, and it actually is, as you just showed, a full-fledged book, but we do have call outs for emphasis. But it also is for where the podcast is mentioned. It's not just about, I do have an affinity for the Z. I don't think that's any secret from the cover you just showed, and so on and so forth. But I want to interview people about their insights to live by just the same.
And I feel like I would be doing a disservice. Well, I'm sure I will do a disservice to the book by just choosing bits that speak to me. So I do encourage listeners to grab a copy of the book themselves, to dig into the riches of it. But the story right out of the gates about how this particular logo came to be, I talk about serendipitous. I don't know.
Sure.
Please tell us that story, and then we'll jump in further.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's funny. When I show it to people, it's not as obvious to them what it is, but the way it started out is it really intertwines with my career, where I started my own company called Z Communication, which is a marketing firm. Advertising, public relations was my background. And I essentially decided to do a positioning of, connecting expression with impression. And so the Z for Z Communication had, dots, on the end, and then behind it was this paintbrush to represent the art of the field. And then those graphic assets kind of evolved as I continued in my career, and I went from my own marketing company into what you mentioned I've been doing ever since, in and around internships. And then when I was working I was in a coffee shop in 2007. And I was just head down, hardwired with music on and really in the zone. And I get tapped on the shoulder by this woman who just came out of nowhere. She was dressed very eccentric, kind of out of a Hollywood movie, gypsy-ish character. And I just looked up at her, and she reaches down and she takes the pen out of my hand. And I had something on my binder that had like a promo of just the Z. And she takes my pen and she draws the line through the Z, and then she draws the dot at the bottom, and then she draws a circle at the top, and she shows it to me. She hands me back my pen. She says nothing. She literally never said a word. And she just smiled at me like her work was done, and she whisked off. And I looked at it, and you can see, for those able to view it, people see this in different ways, but it's actually a man marching forth. It's a man in motion. So that's Z-Man, which is also my nickname from a lot of my friends. So I kind of reverse engineered the book, because ever since that event all those years ago, I had no place for it. It didn't fit in anything. It was like a force fit with the internship stuff. And I wanted it to have a home. So the book was, worked backwards from that image.
I love that story. And I feel, the book is full of that, right? The connection of, maybe this is because of where I am at in my career right now, which is, I think I mentioned to you when we initially had connected, I'm writing a book on leadership, and it's really about the integration of head and heart. And so I kept hearing and feeling that as I was reading through your book, is the integration of head and heart. And so I felt like that was a story, one of many that represented that.
Yeah, I mean, it just sounds bizarre when I tell it or people hear it, but 100% bizarre, but 100% true. It was just one of those events. Yeah, exactly.
I love
Meaningful. Thanks.
And so your book itself has got 14 chapters, and each chapter it's its own Z-ism. Is that right? Is that what you call it? Is that?
Well,
no?
I mean, well, not necessarily. Well,
or Z-isms throughout all.
Throughout. Well, yeah, like I said, I mean, there are call out quotes that are meant to emphasize certain things. It really just builds one on the other, from self-discovery and mindset into things around personal interactions and relationships. And then, as you know, into like mindfulness, law of attraction, things that intertwine with my entrepreneurial experiences. And I really just wanted to make the book practical and have it have that life enrichment action plan that is in the later chapter, to give someone into personal development that framework to follow, reflecting back on things that are in the book, or someone into just having a tune-up or doing some of those things a la carte. So yeah, it's pretty packed.
It is really packed. So I'm going to jump to what you were just referencing. I was going to bring it up later, but let's just go with that. So you talked about the life enrichment action plan, or LEAP for short, which I thought was really cool how you said, and I like this kind of stuff. Within at the time that you're talking about this particular aspect of the book, you talk about life enrichment action plan and commit to taking that leap.
Right.
That's the acronym, but it also is very much an action, which can certainly be. We talk about taking that leap of faith, right?
Yeah.
And so you're saying that you wanted the book to be really practical, and that's one of the call outs that I think I wanted to mention. One of the number of call outs is that there are a lot of amazing books and resources out there, tons. I have a library full of them, and I love reading for the sake of reading. I love reading for the experience of reading, and I really do like reading so I feel changed. And I can take action. And do something different in my life to make it real in my life, not just a feeling thing, but an actual thing in the physical world. And your book, through this leap, I just have to share with the listeners that we've got day one, what you do and how it's connected to earlier aspects of the book. Day 2, day 3, you talk about month 1, month 2, month 3, super, super specific. And I think that's one of the things I want to call out as a gem I find in your book.
Thank you.
So why was it important for you to do that, and why did you choose to do it in this way?
Well, I think that some of the things around writing the book, I wrote it in a little bit of a vacuum. I have to say, sure, I was into personal development quite a bit and consuming books just the same. My early 20s, in my 30s maybe, but I honestly, Louise, I haven't read a personal development book in like years. I mean, I'm with my family and just being, busy with the nonprofit, but that was good too, because I didn't really have anything to compare it to. And so I didn't really know how it would be received, and, everything in my own head, until it got out there. So number one, thank you so much for your kind words. And I just really appreciate your reading it and just what you're describing that you got out of it. And because of a lot of what is in the book is just so, it is very much about putting myself into it, and some of the things that I've learned through and want to share through my life. I wanted to make it very concrete and just break it down, because it really is. I can be accused of being kind of dense, not dense, but that didn't come out right. But really just a lot of information. So I wanted to dissect it and have it be consumable. And I think for anyone who does get into action, it does have to be manageable, and or they'll just feel defeated and back down. So everything that's in there is meant to, in a lot of ways, embed into your day, so that doesn't have to be necessarily a new habit, and things that can be done just one thing at a time in a short amount of time, so that you can build that progress from one to the next.
And I think that's so important for us. Many high achieving adults, type A's, want to just be able to do all the things all at once. And sorry to let you down. Anyone who's listening, who is still in that type A, I can do all the things all at once. It's really just not possible. And so Matt makes it possible in his book. So there are 14 chapters, and they each have a different focus. Where did you come up? Like, how did you come to like these 15? Sorry, 15, aren't there? There are 15.
Well, 15 is actually the walking the talk chapter.
Right. Okay. So
I put myself through the LEAP program, which continues, by the way. I still am stepping up my game. And it is, just the habits you have to form, and, just being true to the advice I'm giving to experience that. So, it's working out pretty well. So far,
yeah.
I'm getting more efficient. But nonetheless, there are some major aspects of the book that kind of build one onto the other. So the front end of it is about earned confidence. And that is really at the foundation of the book. It's referred to throughout. What we're talking about here is just grounding yourself in the fact that we've all been through so much in all of our lives. And well, here we are. I mean, we've made it through whatever that ringer is, those trials and tribulations. And the point is number one, it's just obviously an undeniable logic, but that people have that tendency, that habit that they're in to worry about things, to get anxious and stress and get out of their present flow and get caught up in that negativity. And so the idea of earned confidence is just to bring you back to center and have that align with things like folding gratitude in your day, reminding you that you can just deal with the real and stay in real time where that life enrichment, where that joy really happens as people experience it, and especially be preemptive or at least mitigate the kinds of things that you put yourself through unnecessarily. From a practical standpoint, because people are in that habit, and you can't always catch yourself. You don't even know sometimes you're worrying until it's in your subconscious. But if you worry about a particular event and it never happens, that's when you have to look back and say, well, what did I do to myself? What did I put myself through unnecessarily? What did I do to other people that I was maybe expressing worry to? And of course, friends and family are there to be friends and family and lean on, but those would be things that are about what's real, not necessarily inflicting that negativity. And that's really another point here, is that personal responsibility that we all have around how we affect other people, just from an energy exchange standpoint, and then not doing those kinds of things to ourselves.
I remember you remind me of when I was younger, and it's something that I brought to my adulthood, which at the time when my mom said it to me, it would annoy me. Bless her. I love my mom to bits. She's been on the show, and many people I'm connected with know her. But when I would start to worry about something and verbalize it, because I'm quite verbal, shocking. I've got my own radio show. Right,
I'd never guessed that.
She would say, she would ask me if I could solve it right now. And I would say no. She said, well, write it down, and plan to worry tonight. So I'd have a worry time. So I'd have a time in my day where I'd worry. So I'd go into like a worry jar. And by the time I got to my worry hour, they weren't really worries anymore. They kind of, I brought myself out of that place of, that intense, overwhelmed stress, because it's like, I don't need to be overwhelmed and stressed. It's in the worry jar. I'll worry about that when it's worry time.
Right.
I thought that was actually a really good strategy. And I
like that idea. Right? Is that like a swear jar too? Do you have?
I don't have a swear jar.
I shouldn't bring that up. No, but seriously,
I'm not willing to give up.
Wise woman.
I'm not willing to give up swearing, much to my mom's dismay. She might wish I had a swear jar.
I don't judge.
Yeah. I don't do it often, but when I want to, I'm not putting money in the swear jar. But yeah, I thought I'd share that with you. In chapter 2, Beware of Spiders, which the name just catches your attention right away, you write, there are only 2 kinds of people in the world. There are spiders, and there are those who get caught in webs. What do you mean? Tell us what you mean by that.
Right. It's funny, this is the chapter that I almost didn't put in the book, because it's like, which of these is not like the other? It's a cautionary, some hard living behind it, essentially. And what we're talking about is the fact that, we have a lot of moving parts about ourselves in our interactions with other people. It's really hard to get a handle on all of it and that constant flow of information. And you're looking for those things that you can kind of stop in their tracks. What is a this or a that? And so when we're talking about spiders, we're talking about people who are manipulative. And the reason why it's a this or that is because that's a conscious decision that somebody makes, that they will impose their will on someone else to whatever end to bend to their selfish motives. And it doesn't necessarily make somebody a bad person. This is not a black and white situation in that way, but from a character trait standpoint, it kind of is. And whether or not someone's going to be that way toward you, it's not to say someone who has that character trait is going to do that to everyone. It might just be 1% of the time, but the fact is that they will do that. And I do believe that's the minority. I think that the rest of us are prefer to just believe the best in people and give people the benefit of the doubt, but that also makes us vulnerable, and that we're willing to be vulnerable so that we don't want to put the energy into always being on guard all the time. But over time, you really have to gain some awareness around how do you recognize that and avoid those webs. And, part of it's some of the things around emotional intelligence. Some of it's just staying above things. Some of it's being respecting yourself. So if you are someone, for example, who has a hard time saying no, you say, well, yeah, I really need to say no more. So if that's resonating, you're probably somebody who has or is a little bit more prone to be someone's prey, because they know that they're going to take advantage of having you say yes to something that really they probably know that they shouldn't even be asking. And what's worse is that when you don't say no, it's a double hit, because then whatever it is that you do that you wish you had said no to, hits your self-esteem. And I think that the key here, and this actually, again, as it builds back off of the previous chapter on earned confidence, is that factor around kindness to yourself as well as to other people. And what I mean is, we can look at things like self-esteem or self-love almost like they're almost more conceptual. It's hard to get your arms around it, right? They're elusive. But when you look at kindness as, again, a kind of a this or a that, and you just ask yourself in any given situation, is saying yes to this being kind to myself? Because if it's not, say no. It's that barometer. So if you can, really put that practical, foundation around kindness in these kinds of circumstances, you'll avoid those webs, among other things.
Oh my gosh, that was so good. Is saying yes to this being kind to myself. Such a good practical thing. I think we often say yes to things because we're uncomfortable with the idea of saying no, right? And then trying to avoid discomfort. And instead we're just postponing the discomfort, perhaps, because it's discomfort within our own self.
Right. Well, kindness, I guess. And in all fairness, that's just one part of the equation. Then it's how do you say no? How do you, because you want to be a people pleaser and things like that. But if you say, well, I do, this is just not something I want to do or is best for me to do. It's almost like bullying, when you're dealing with somebody like that, and they'll respect you for saying no, just the same as pushing back on a bully in that way. It's the same kind of a dynamic. And so when you respect yourself and say, you know what, I really have some other priorities right now. I'd love to help you. Have you considered doing this instead? Just kind of deflect a little bit. Those are the kinds of things that are going to preserve your own, still can feel good about myself in saying no, but you'll feel even better about yourself by saying no.
I was listening to a podcast this morning, a Brene Brown podcast, and I wish I could remember the two guys she had on the show. They were amazing. They were talking about this very thing and how challenging it was for them to put it into action. And so when they were gaining, I think they had a Netflix show, and they started to really gain in popularity in their area of work. And they said that they used to get a lot of emails from people, and the number of emails just shot up of this nature once they became more successful. And the emails were about, oh, can I just take you to coffee? I want to pick your brain on X, Y, Z. And they used to say yes all the time. When they started to realize that it was at the expense of their wife and their children,
Right.
They had to actually come forward and start saying no, and this is why. And so then that was hard for them to do. You know, they said that in the moment it was uncomfortable, but it was the right thing to do. It was the kinder thing to do for themselves and for others. And they did say, but if you want to just send an email and ask your question here, we'll answer it. And so,
Right.
you know,
It's
I
another
thought
great
that was a good
example.
example. Yeah.
Like
I thought that was a great example. So I love that you bring that concept of, you know, of kindness forward in the book. In the chapter of A Dose of Prevention, you said prevention begins with being true to yourself. How did you come to this truth? Because it's not something that you learn overnight.
Right. Well, prevention, you know, that is kind of a little bit of a life experience aspect. There's a lot of practical things in that chapter. I mean, right down to wearing sunscreen, right? You caught that, like, wear sunscreen, you won't get burned. You know, there's some simple aspects to it around that. I mean, generally speaking, you know, the best way to manage a crisis is not to let it happen. So what is that? You know, what is that to be true to yourself? I think one of the things that, this was actually more in the spider chapter, if I recall, but well, it is because I do. But
I wrote it.
Yeah, that's right. I did. But I had a former intern of mine who was doing another internship, and honestly, she was being taken a lot of advantage of, and it was a terrible situation, and she was having a hard time saying no, and it was really taking its toll on her. And you know, I kind of talked her through it. I actually you know, wrote the letter with her, you know, how to get out of the situation in a professional way. And that really came back to just being true to yourself. Again, I think that those two things combined, you know, she was able to head off the emotional toll, and it took her a while to shake it too. And again, it comes back to, you know, self-respect and you know, there's just so much different things in that chapter. The whole letter in that chapter I wrote to my son, right, who just went off to college, and all the things that a dad would say to, you know, I put it in writing, right, because he's not going to listen to me necessarily. All the things I wanted to say, and when I moved him into his dorm, you know, left it there with him and let him know it was there, and you know, all those kinds of things around prevention. So it's there's just a lot of life experience there, Louise.
Yeah, and I think that's certainly apparent. So there's a depth to what it is that you share through the gems and the actions and the takeaways. There's a depth to the words, because there's an energy around it, actually. You know, and the energy is one of experience. I don't know if you know what I mean when there's an energy of the words in a book. I don't know if you've ever felt that before, if you feel those things when you read books, or if that's just a Louise thing.
Well, I have a really good friend of mine who is a tough critic of all things, and she's a former supervisor as well early in my career. And you know, she read the book and she's like, I hear you in that book the entire way. I mean, it's written like a personal conversation, but
yeah,
she said the voice was captured, and you know, she felt like I was sitting right there with her, and you know, gave me some, you know, she was kind about, you know, her feedback, and I just really appreciated it. So yeah, there's a lot of hard living. You know, the spider chapter certainly is part of that. But most of what I'm writing in there, I mean, you know, is really based on personal experience.
Mm-hmm. And as an entrepreneur, you know, someone who has professionally done what you have done, I think it's just that integration of these pearls of wisdom coming both from a professional and personal perspective really broadens the audience of who would benefit from the book. Who did you write the book for?
Wow. Well, it definitely cuts across the board. So for one, all the experiences over the years, you know, one of the reasons I got into the internship space is because I'd always done that. Having had 4 internships myself, working with hundreds of college students, although most of what I do with the nonprofit is working with employers to set programs up, it's really evident, there being no substitute for experience, that there are a lot of things that would be helpful for people coming into the work world to know. So a good bit of it is what I wish my younger self knew. I think that letter to my son is probably a good example of that. There's a lot of what I do around career transition in my experience with the nonprofit. It's just not, everything that we talk about, well, it's internships, is completely transferable to, I had a grant on military transition, working with disadvantaged youth, everything for companies that, or organizations that have volunteers, and then techniques to go and get jobs. So anybody who's in that kind of a transition is certainly part of it. Life transition, like me with my son off to college. And it's written for human beings really across the board who are into personal development and want to take action.
Yeah. And so if I may, one of the things, because I do love a lot of personal development books, but it can get a bit, you can overdose on personal development books. And I feel that while this is absolutely, in that space, because of how you came from it, perhaps because you said that you've not really read any personal development books for a really long
I'm curious,
time.
Where are you going with this? The
no, so I was going to say, so as a result, yes, it is, but no, it isn't. So yes, it is, right, but it isn't written in the same way that it feels as, I feel, as
it's
overwhelming
very personal.
and daunting.
Yeah. I felt like if I was going to put myself out there and have a, that personal conversation, I wanted to make certain disclosures. There's plenty of anecdotes and things, and that being,
and the pictures. I like the pictures.
Yeah, there's some pictures in there. Exactly. Yeah. The hard copy, the black and white. Yeah, some of my favorite pictures are in there for sure.
Yeah, it's awesome. One of the things as well that I love how you bring into the book is the conversation around mood. Right. And I think it's something, mood and emotions in general, I don't think get enough attention, certainly in the workplace, but in all of our relationships as well, work or otherwise. Tell us how, so you've got a mood scale. Tell us, talk to us a little bit about, this particular chapter and how people can use this and why this is in personal development. Like, why is this important that this is in your book?
Right. Well, when we, just stepping back from the mood chapter, I would say that between earned confidence and then in there is a chapter on, in between these two is a chapter on perception itself. And then the mood chapter are those filters in how we experience the world around us. So again, I'm just going to stay top line for a minute and then get a little bit deeper into your answer. I think everybody can relate to, nice day versus rainy day and how that makes you feel. And I think everybody can relate to mostly at some point experiencing some level of depression, or certainly I don't think anyone is spared of having someone very close to them, a family member, who has to deal with some kind of mood health, mental health event in their lives, be that as a caregiver or in need of it. And for me personally, one of the things I speak to, and it's been private, is that I have had to contend with depression since my early teens. I didn't exactly get the best gene pool. My dad was bipolar. My mom was a depressive. My brother Dave was also, and we lost him in 2012. And I miss him, but it's nice to talk about him too at this point. So I really try and be practical around the notion of this mood scale, which is kind of, it's a original drawing that I had done, an illustration that's kind of like a thermometer, where you have this normal range, whatever that is. Oh, there you go. So you have this normal range where, of course, in the center, you've got perfect balance. And how long are any of us really there? But, we have this like normal range of happy, normal range of sad. And then below that is mild, moderate, severe depression. And then, to the other side is, the aspects of elevation, which maybe a bipolar person would experience, but mainly focused on depression. And from my own personal experience, what I need to do to take care of myself and some of the advice around that to others. And so one of the things I speak to there, as you know, Louise, is the 3-day rule. And if I know I'm going to have a rainy day, kind of a feeling day, and then, being on the entrepreneur, being an entrepreneur since 2002, I think any entrepreneur would relate to, you get punched in the gut, 3-4 times a week, if not 10, and you're always going to take your hits. But if I get to a third day, I really have to get into action. I really kind of parent myself. It's almost like what you're talking about with your mom. I really love that story, by the way. What a great lady. I just don't let myself lay around. I get into action. I work out. I have to structure my day. I think a lot of people are dealing with this right now, especially with being displaced with COVID and other things going on. And people are a lot more susceptible to this. So I do think it's important to speak to. And for me, if I get to like a third, fourth day, it's like sinking in quicksand. Literally, the further you let that go, the harder it is to get out of it. And I think that a lot of people suffer in silence. I think, to your point, there are stigmas around this, and I think it's a high time that we get past them. I mean, the brain is certainly part of the body, pretty important part, and why we separate mental health from general health. I don't really, well, I get the history, but I don't think it's very practical. And so, for one of the things I think is a silver lining around COVID is telehealth, because people don't have to have that barrier of, now I got to go find some other doctor and go, lie on the proverbial couch. You can reach out. I know the suicide hotline number is right there in that chapter as well. And the thing with depression is, of course, back to that being filter, there's the road colored lenses, and then there's the opposite of the gray colored lenses. And, I've been through that a number of times in my life. Fortunately, I haven't had a bout in some years now, but I could say that you have to kind of hold on to that reminder that as bad as you feel, you won't always feel that badly. And you have to, fight your way back out of that quicksand. And if you're somebody who has sunk so deeply you can't get out, don't let yourself convince yourself that the world's better without you or anything along those lines. You need to reach out, make that call. So that's a little bit of depth.
It is. I love that it's in the book. I could, because of my own personal experiences as well, I could spend a whole hour talking about this chapter. But there are other podcasts with that kind of focus. But I wanted just to say some of the Z-isms in this, or call outs in this particular chapter. One which you sort of which you mentioned already. Keeping up with life's demands feels more like wading through quicksand.
Right.
And so true all the time. And I think more pronounced right now. So I love some of the, the tactics that you suggest to keep moving.
Right.
There's another one. There's just no other way but through. Because it's like, well, yeah.
That's everything, right? I mean, we're all, it's hard because, it's in that chapter, but it's worth, just referencing. You don't have to be depressed to have that approach. It's hard to step out of a difficult situation and be objective, but that's really what that is, well, this is where I am. I mean, you might be in grief, you might be in a job transition, but again, back to earned confidence, you've always made it through. We're survivors. You might not have all the answers, but you'll find them because that's what you've always done. So there's no other way but through. So if you could step back in any situation and look at, well, what is that point B, and what's the straightest line I can draw with, and still be true to myself in terms of the feelings I might have to experience, go there.
Love it. So the next chapter 6, you talk about managing energy.
Right.
Talk to us about what that means and the importance of it. You alluded to it at the beginning of the book.
Right. Well, there's
beginning about.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's a constant. I think it's a lot around mindfulness. It's a lot around personal interactions. The reference to knowing and being mindful of how we affect one another, because we do. One of the things I speak to is like being in a restaurant. I think it's one of the easiest examples. And you're there with, you and I are having coffee right now. We're having a great time. And a server comes up to us and they, for whatever reason, are in a really bad mood. And it's, easy to take notice. And it's very typical to lose yourself there and say, well, what's that person's problem? And then all of a sudden you're out of your game. And well, we were just having a nice conversation, right? We were just experiencing a certain positivity, and we let that energy transfer. And so, through the years, as another example, I mean, I was a single dad from '02 until a few years ago. And I'm not known as a great chef, for one, Louise. So I've definitely been out to a lot of restaurants with Jake, and this happens frequently. And so we in that case, we'll make a note to try and make that person laugh or something. Their last customer was bad or just having a bad day or whatever, and just just kind of pay it forward in that way. So being mindful of our energy interactions are really important. That certainly leads into things around getting into the flow and law of attraction and coincidences and those experiences. But the other thing that really applies here for me as an entrepreneur is managing energy, not time. Because especially from a writing standpoint, because I could sit in the front of the computer and be like, I can't write a cohesive sentence, in the last 10 minutes. Maybe I should go do laundry, just do something that doesn't take the same energy. So knowing when you are, you have a better sense of energy and mental acuity, do the things that align with what we all have, these long to-do lists. So how do those align? Maybe it's even when you can work out. So that's just kind of a day-to-day thing.
And I love that. I'm definitely a subscriber for scheduling your day around your energy as well. And so being in tune with that, I think, is so important. Like, I've learned that, I've known this for a long time, that I'm a morning person. Why then did I not schedule my day accordingly? Right. So,
right.
I've always thought that, when I work for, consulting with a company or working for a company. So if I don't have my own business, you don't have as much choice and control of your calendar. I kind of disagree. I think we have a lot more choice than we give ourselves credit for. And so scheduling your day and tasks around when you have the most energy. So my thinking work has to happen in the morning.
Right.
If I'm going to do any kind of research and start to piece things together for a strategy, and that has to happen in the morning. It's not going to happen after lunch. Any time from 2:00 onwards, no, that's meetings. It's, answering emails. But it's not thinking work. And that's all to do with taking a step back and being mindful about energy. So I love that you've included that in the book. And one of the Z-isms here that I highlighted was, healthy people don't go around destroying others.
Right. Yeah. That's a real energy point there too. Spiders, just the same. So
absolutely. You mentioned a moment ago about law of attraction. Tell us a little bit about what that is and how your book approaches law of attraction a little differently.
Sure. Well, so I want to look at it more from a practical standpoint, because I think most people have heard of the law of attraction. They're familiar with the association to it being rooted in gratitude. I look to some of what we just talked about, folding gratitude into the day. It's easy to blink and just, what happened? The day is gone, and the tail wagged the dog, or however it went, and you have to take control of that. And so I do set alerts on my phone. I do look for things like, I have a thing for 11:11, as you know, that's chapter 11. So that's kind of a synchronicity experience that I will stop. I mean, look, I can stop for 1 minute a day 4 times. I mean, I don't know, that's pretty manageable. So I do use the alerts on my phone, and I do, when I put my feet on the floor in the morning, the first thought of it is gratitude. It's just, when I brush my teeth. I mean, you get domestic here, but that's how you fold it into things that you have to do anyway, and not have it be something you have to make some new habit. It's just an intention. So the law of gratitude, essentially, as I look at it, it boils down to what you expect tends to happen. And so if you look back at worrying, for example, back to earn confidence and having that apply so that you don't worry, and we look at worry as being an expectation, essentially, of what you don't want to happen, you could, according to the law of attraction, be the very cause of the thing that you don't want to happen. So whether you subscribe to the law of attraction or the aspects of it or not, assuming it's there, worrying is not a good idea. I tell people not to worry about me, Louise. I was like, you're going to get me hurt. Like, don't worry about me. Don't have a safe flight. Have a great flight. Right. Even something that basic, but that's the point, is just to be rooted back in gratitude, and there's some things that go beyond that chapter into the entrepreneurial side of things that are not as transactional as the law of attraction, things that are more effortful. It just depends on how it applies.
Mm-hmm. I think it applies in all aspects, but you're right. Like, I mean, there are takeaways for people involved from all walks of life, for sure. One of the things you mentioned about fear, and sometimes us creating what we fear the most. There was this saying, and I don't know if it's a real saying or if my sister came up with it or I've morphed it somehow, but what came to mind was you create what you fear the most. And I remember hearing that for years and thinking it was just the dumbest thing. And as time went on, I was like, I'm starting to get it. And it really is a thing. And I relate it to when I see I'm really, really bad at nailing potholes every time. And actually now I just say nailed it, because it's like, but what am I staring at when I'm trying to not hit it? I'm fearing hitting the pothole. Don't hit the pothole, Louise. Don't hit the pothole. Boom. Almost every time.
Right. Even when you're so aware of it and trying to pay attention.
But I'm worrying about it.
Right.
But then that's my point, is worrying about it instead of focusing on the road ahead. Anyway, I just think that it's a really silly but very real example of how we actually end up creating that in other parts of our lives by creating this worry and like hyper focus on.
I mean, it's such an individual experience. Whether it's just that being present and rooting in gratitude and that feeling of being in the flow and things going your way, and all the way out to having it work against you in the way that you just described. But it's hard to sustain. I mean, look, life's really busy, and that's why I think folding gratitude in the day is important to try and keep in touch with that flow.
It really is, and it's all rooted in positive science, positive psychology. There's lots of brain research on the benefits of gratitude, that it's not just fluff, it's fact, it's science. So buy the book, check it out, Z-isms, Insights to Live By. We are coming close to the top of the hour, and so I want to just mention there are more than half of the book we didn't even get a chance to touch on. But I have a few questions that I wanted to ask you more personally. So one of them is, what did you learn through this experience of writing this book? Because you mentioned that you put yourself through the LEAP program. So what did you learn about yourself?
Wow. Well, for one, I mean, the book is something that I've been wanting to do for a long time. And with Jake going off to college and my just being at a point in life of having a little bit of space and looking at, well, what would I regret not doing? That's really kind of what got the book into action. And it wasn't like I'm doing this now. It was like, okay, let me put my concepts down. And then, the spiders, the earned confidence, like all those things have been hanging with me for such a long time. And then it was almost like I did too much to turn back. It was like, oh, okay, now, I forced myself into it and just kept going. But I am definitely somebody who finishes the goals that I set, the 100 million notwithstanding. And, what did I learn about myself? Well, my leap is continuous, and I still am trying to step up my game. Even since, the book came out the end of March, and I did think it was important to write that chapter, literally what I experienced, almost in a journal fashion in that chapter, and what I continue to experience. I think for me, what did I learn about myself? I learned that I walk the talk. So that's. I'd say that, but it's a constant having to parent myself, having just not let myself off the hook. I have a power hour every day that I have to carve out. I can break it into 2 now. I let myself do that, but the more I can do it in the morning and knock out, like getting on the bike or doing some other physical something, the easier it's going to be not having to do it late after I've had a day. But it's still not a day goes by when I let myself off the hook.
I love that. So I've got 3 more questions,
Okay.
like rapid fire type questions.
All right.
You mentioned this also earlier, or alluded to this, about advice for younger self. So what advice would you give to your younger self?
Well, one of the advice I gave to Jake, above all the things that I said in that letter, was just make good decisions. That's just like the catch-all. I would go back to the just be kind to yourself. Why be anything less than kind to yourself? Start there. That's the practical building block for everything else. So it took me a long time to learn that too.
Such power in simplicity, isn't there?
Yeah.
And that is that. That's that. I like. Thanks for sharing that. Do you have a favorite book from the past? Because I know. Anyway, do you read other types of books right now? I know you mentioned you didn't do self-help, but anyway, books are the go-to podcast that you wish to share with our listeners, other than yours and other than your upcoming podcast.
Of course. Well, the crossover. I mean, certainly, The Secret was a little bit of an influence on the later chapters we just discussed, but probably the one that has stuck with me most practically is Blink by Malcolm Gladwell. Because it talks about trusting your gut and how doing that, you make better decisions than overanalyzing things. And at that point in my life, and it's some years back, right? I couldn't tell you the year quite when that book came out. I did overanalyze things. I did waste a lot of energy, and I smartened up thanks to that, and it served me really well. Yeah.
A great reference. Malcolm Gladwell, all his books are genius. So I echo that comment on Blink. And then finally, what does the world need more of?
Kindness. I know that I'd rather be redundant and go deep and reinforce that redundancy. Most of what's been said so far is about kindness to yourself. This is a lot having to do with kindness to others. There's certainly a lot of that right now in the mainstream, and it's so simple, but for if you're into karma, what comes around goes around. That's another aspect to it. But I think people who emphasize being kind end up being much better off than those who are less than kind.
Yeah. To mention my mom again, growing up, she said kindness is the most underrated quality. And through life, I've learned that to be true as well. Matt, you've just been a joy. Thank you so much for all of the time you've shared, all of what you have shared, for writing this book. How can people get a hold of you? How can they best get a copy of their hands on the book? Sure.
Thank you, Louise. Well, for one, there's a website, which is Z or Z, whichever you prefer, -isms.com. There's some free resources there. You can read the first part of the book there. And also, of course, on Amazon. And I encourage people to read the reviews. People have been really kind. I'm very grateful how it's been received. And again, you could read the first part of the book there. I mean, all I can ask is go check it out. And if you want to keep reading, you'll know. So
I love it. I love it. The website will be in the show notes. So if you are driving and don't have a pen handy, know that they will be there. So just check out louisehreed.com, or however you like to catch the podcast. You'll find that website and all this yumminess about how you can get your hands on this book in the show notes. Once again, Matt, thank you again so much for your time.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
And of course, thanks to all of you, my loyal Lady Boss listeners, for tuning in for today's show. And I invite you to reach out. I love to hear feedback from you. If you have questions or want to talk about coaching, speaking engagements, or leadership consulting, let's all live inspired, grow together, and be brave, be bold, be happy. And in the words of Matt, why be anything but kind to yourself? Until next week, my friends, I'm Louise H. Reed, wishing all of you an amazing day. Goodbye.